and welcome back to the channel. My name is Muriel, and in this video I will be doing my August reading wrap-up. In the month of August, I read a total of 9 books. 4 novellas this time, and 5 novels. First, I'm going to talk about the 4 novellas, because they are all part of a series titled Our Vitreous Womb, written and self-published by a friend of mine, Haldane B. Doyle. The novellas themselves are titled as follows: Her Unbound Hallux, Her Lethal Secretions, Her Pellucid Pupil, and His Indelible Fingerprint. I would label my friend's series as biology-centric, far-future science and light dystopian fiction. We have a slight disagreement about the utopia v dystopia qualifier, and yes, I'll concede it's not dystopian fiction in the traditional sense, but my friend's story deals with selective breeding, artificial selection carried over thousands of years, a very rigid, hyper-specialized caste society that doesn't really leave room for imperfection and individuality, in at least my sense of the word, and, well, different offshoots of humanity, one of which may ultimately replace us. That, to my mind, doesn't exactly count as utopian at the very least, but your mileage will undoubtedly vary there. The quartet, as a unified story, revolves around a character named Oji Anabasi, but you never directly get his point of view. Rather, each novella focuses on a character that impacts Oji's life journey and thus allows you to discover the different facets of the story's future-set world and engage with its ideas. Because yes, whilst I'll admit, some elements of this quartet weren't particularly compatible with my own ideals or opinions about some things, I do have a lot of respect for the fact my friend wrote ideas-driven science fiction that also has, for one thing, very nice prose, and for another, interesting characters. But I'm going to leave off here because I will be doing a dedicated but somewhat tweaked series review for Our Vitreous Womb in the near future. I feel a bit weird about slapping a rating on this, although I guess I technically did it for my X Davis novel, so yeah. This as a series, for me, falls somewhere between a 6 out of 10 and a 7 out of 10, to accommodate for both a sheer enjoyment factor and then a more detached intellectual engagement one. It has, like I said, elements that only rarely work for me in science fiction, so I got a bit less on the pure enjoyment factor, I guess. But conversely, I also found it very interesting and creative. There was a lot for me to think about in his story, even if I didn't always agree with the character stakes and whatnot. And as such, yeah, I definitely think it's a good quartet, and that it would appeal, yes, to lots of readers looking for something intelligent and more than a bit different. Onto the novels now. First, I read Christina Henry's Alice. Now, this is technically part of an ongoing series, I believe, but you can definitely just read the first book as a standalone. This shorter novel is essentially a dark urban fantasy retelling of Through the Looking Glass and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, with a setting that vaguely reminded me of China Mieville's Eucrobizon or Bloodborne's Yharnam a bit. That's a good thing in my book, to be clear. And I found it very compelling. I really enjoyed the fact this story features, for one thing, a love-based relationship rooted in years-long friendship, you'll love to see it, and found its theming on sexual violence, exploitation, and overcoming trauma, because yes, be warned, there's a decent bit of that. Like I said, it's dark. I found all that decently well executed, if not all that deep either. Still, it wasn't mishandled, so you know what? I'll take it. The story's conclusion also felt just right, with just a perfect little nod to the source material it's retelling, which is something I always appreciate. This is one literary telling I would definitely recommend, especially if you like the darker corners of urban fantasy, and I rated it with a solid 7 out of 10, though, you know, I just felt really satisfied with this one book, and I don't feel any particular need to keep going with the series. And of course, I also read the last entry in Octavia E. Butler's Xenogenesis trilogy, Imago, and I didn't like it at all. I didn't enjoy a single minute of it and skim read the last 60 or so pages. Now, I recently did a series review for Xenogenesis, which you can check out if you feel so inclined, and will thus only reiterate here that I thoroughly enjoyed and have a lot of respect for the undeniable quality of this series' at times relentless theming, and most aspects of its alien species building. The Oankali are a truly alien species, and I give full marks to Butler for that alone. But the trilogy also suffers from significant flaws, in my opinion, of course, such as truly awful sexist gendered characterization and an uncomfortably confusing pseudo-endorsement of genetic determinism that its qualities could compensate for past the first half of its second book. Xenogenesis sadly qualifies as a case of diminishing returns for me, and I would advise readers skip book 3 altogether, quite frankly. It adds absolutely nothing to the theming, nor even to the series' overarching plot, and features a lot of pointless by the time you reach book 3 sex-related cringe that painfully belabors the point of the series' otherwise intelligently utilized rapey aliens go brrrr motif. So Imago was a paltry 4 out of 10 for me and soured my appreciation of the trilogy as a whole, but I would still wholeheartedly recommend Dawn, which I rated with a strong 7 out of 10, and even Adulthood Rights to a lesser extent. It was a weaker 6.5 out of 10 read for me, but it completes the series' thematic exploration and provides a satisfying conclusion to its broader plot. So yeah, read this one as a duology is my recommendation. After Xenogenesis, I read Connie Willis's Doomsday book, a standalone novel with a neat enough premise. Historians in the near future of the 2050s conduct research using time machines, and a double past and present pandemic story unfolds from Oxford University's Balliol and Brasenose colleges, sending a very young and somewhat over-enthusiastic student named Kivrin back to the 14th century to take field notes, if you will. And guess what? Things don't quite go according to plan. Dun dun dun. Unfortunately, everything outside of that base premise felt milquetoast. I didn't get anything specific in terms of theming. Welp, but okay, fine. Let's table that, I suppose. On the world-building front, I mean, the story's base premise, whilst neat, sure, does also require a significant suspension of disbelief right out of the gate, let's be honest. Does 2054 Oxford has mini-nuclear reactors to power their time-traveling labs? Y'all are telling me that unis can just use that shit to yeet master's students through space-time, but it doesn't seem to have affected the rest of the world to any meaningful degree? Come on now. Then you have the book's medieval historical world-building, and it felt a little dated in places. But then again, it was published in 1992, and it's true that our understanding of the past is continually improving, so I can give that a pass. But back to the future world-building, I just didn't get a good sense of what the world was meant to have become in 2054 either. That being said, this SF Masterworks edition's introduction implies this disinterest in near-future world-building was meant to encourage the reader to focus on the story's characters and emotional beats. But guess what? I didn't feel much of anything reading this novel, except, I don't know, I chuckled here and there, I suppose. Nor did I really care about anyone in it. Barring one specific character and his relationship with another, that kind of moved me, so I'll give it that. The pacing also felt off. I found the delivery of the plot's twists, turns, and climaxes overall ineffective. There was a fair bit of drawn-out baiting as well, and I just stopped caring around the 60% mark. The ending was predictable and entirely meh. Somewhat unearned, perhaps, but inoffensively so, I guess. And yeah, the page count here feels overall just unjustifiably excessive to me. But still, I'd say read this one if you want a relatively bland but serviceable literary snack that throws historical fiction, time travel, and pandemics together in a blender. For my part, this was an SF Masterworks, and I read it. The end. After that, I read Rivers Solomon's Sorrowland, a book I essentially picked up because I'd heard it had interesting themes, mixed science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and featured fungal shenanigans of some sort. Its premise is as follows. a 15-year-old girl named Vern escapes what I'm going to call a black separatist cult to give birth to twins in the woods, and shit eventually happens involving a fungal infection. There were bits of inspired prose here and there, which was nice, but also a lot of telling and not showing, especially when it came to character work, doubly so when considering the story's antagonist, and when it came to the development of the novel's psyop thriller kind of subplot. None of that felt satisfyingly fleshed out to me. The novel's action sequences also felt a little gimmicky in places, and Vern's characterization, or rather, more specifically, the characterization of her level of maturity as it related to her age, felt off to me as well. The theming, for its part, felt woefully inadequate. There is some, yes, but I didn't find it good. It never rose beyond an extremely superficial, all bark and no deeper nuanced analysis level. I found both, sorry not sorry, eye roll and yawn inducing. I get the angry feels trademark. I genuinely do. I do. But nonetheless, the specific flavor expressed in this book, whilst perfectly valid, is simply not to my taste. Stuff like, am I actually a woman though? When you've literally given birth to and breastfed twins, however, can just get the fuck out of my face. Again, sorry, not sorry, because there's some of that and I just don't have any patience for it. A mild spoiler perhaps, but this novel features an extremely out-of-left-field fungal ghost orgy scene. Now, I wasn't bothered by it, to be clear, but it's so... What the fuck is happening? Oh! So, we're doing this right now. I thought I'd mention it. Speaking of fungal ghosts, I'm sad to say there was next to nothing here in terms of deeper world-building, and if there is one thing I'm genuinely annoyed by, it's the fact shrooms, what they are, what they can, and can't actually do, are taken seriously in this story. And a few others I've read, unfortunately. Yes, it's an issue more broadly inherent to the phenomenon of trends, I know, but it doesn't change the fact Sorrowland's fungus is little more than a magic device, and one I found incredibly underwhelming. Related to this, so I went into this novel expecting somewhat of a genre blender, but still with recognizably science fiction-y bits. But as a whole, it doesn't actually feel like proper science fiction to me. It rather feels like what I've been calling magical science fiction. A hybrid genre I've yet to find truly appealing, honestly. I didn't know that much about, nor have super specific expectations of Sorrowland going in, and well, it turned out to be rather mediocre. A case of massively wasted potential for me, made all the more unpalatable by superficial theming of a kind I'm just never going to enjoy. And that's that. I gave it a 5.5 out of 10, and wouldn't particularly recommend this one, but then, you know, lots of people seem to enjoy Rivers Solomon's novels, so you make of that as you will, as always. The last book I read in August was Neverwhere, written by Neil Gaiman. This has made me realize just how much I now appreciate smaller scale, dark, and/or urban fantasy as a more experienced reader. Bonus points if the fantasy in question also has supernatural or folkloric, mythological elements. Gaiman's novel certainly qualifies as the former, at least, and that's what I found cozy about it in a way. You, the reader, follow the story's main character, named Richard, into London below, an interstitial underworld infused with magic, of a basically undefined kind. There's no system involved here, you just have to roll with whatever's happening, as if you were in a rather dark dream. And I enjoyed that feeling, the atmosphere of this darkly magical Londonian dreamscape. The prose was beautifully rich, rhythmic, even playful at times. There were also a few dashes of well-placed British humour here and there, yay. But, because there is a but, I don't really think I got all that much out of the story either. Granted, I went the audiobook route with this one, and it may be the case that I absorb a book less efficiently on average when I listen to it, though I'm not entirely sure about that. And conversely, I actually found it, once again, extremely cozy to do so here. And I need to praise Gaiman for the fact he did a fantastic job narrating his own story. I didn't latch on too much of anything in terms of theming, character work, or deeper world-building, but it was fun to see parallels with other similar works. And I guess perhaps that's the crux of the matter. Neverwhere was my first foray into Neil Gaiman's fiction, and I'd say it was a decently enjoyable one. Most definitely. But I just have this feeling it won't turn out to be all that memorable either in the long run, as I've read other such works of dark, urban fantasy, drawing on a rich substrate of culture and folklore I enjoyed a lot more. China Mieville's Kraken comes to mind. Still, the time I spent listening to Neverwhere was time well spent overall, and I rated it a 6.5 to a soft 7 out of 10, and once again, that is not bad by any means. And now for the cinematic media section. Last month, I finally got around to finishing Supernatural. Yes, I know the show's 15th and final season came out a couple of years ago, but I'm shite at keeping up with movies and shows, and that's that. Supernatural has a very special place in my heart. I like to call it my guilty pleasure TV show, and I've been watching it for, well, yeah, it must have been over 10 years. I just loved its let's throw 1,000 different supernatural things taken from folklore, mythology, and religion at the wall and see what sticks approach. And its characters. I loved me some Sam and Dean Winchester, but Castiel and Crowley for the fucking win, especially fight me on this. I also just freaking loved its classic rock soundtrack. Like, that's at least 25% of the appeal right there. And the fact it starts taking itself way less seriously around season 4, I think it was, with goofily meta episodes and just, yeah, absurd humor, because I'm sorry, but restructuring hell to make it a never-ending queue, that's just hilarious to me. But the show indulged in all of that without ever losing sight of its heart either, and I respect that. There's a lot of filler content here, there is cringe at times, yes. And it's way longer than it actually needs to be, without a doubt. But you know what? It had a solid ending, and I fucking cried. I did. I felt the feels, experienced catharsis, because they did a decent job wrapping it all up, and yeah, I feel satisfied with how it all ended, so that's all that really matters to me. I also watched 2 Studio Ghibli movies last month, in very nice company, to boot. A quick reminder that up until this point, I'd essentially never watched a single Studio Ghibli movie. Okay, not counting its adaptation of Earthsea, for freaking obvious reasons, if you know anything about it. Though, sure, it's not as bad as the Sci-Fi Channel's version. But I mean, that was just abject garbage, so not sure Studio Ghibli deserves a cookie for not being as bad as that. In any case, my first proper Studio Ghibli movie was Kiki's Flying Delivery Service. It tells the story of a tween witch named Kiki, who moves to a coastal city with her black cat familiar named Gigi, if I remember correctly, to develop her specific skills as a witch. Shortly after she arrives, she meets a baker who offers her room and board and helps her to set up a delivery service because Kiki is a particularly skilled broomstick rider, is what I'm going to call it. The movie then illustrates her struggles with loneliness, homesickness, and a sense of purposelessness, which was somewhat moving, though the movie never did so with all that much depth. And it has an ending I found a little abrupt for my taste. Overall, I thought it was sweet, and that's about it. Just a cozy little tale with some emotion to it that I give a 6 to 6.5 out of 10. But after that, I watched Howl's Moving Castle, which I enjoyed quite a bit more. Now, full disclosure here, I've never read the Diana Wynne Jones novel it purportedly adapts. In fact, I've never read anything written by Diana Wynne Jones. I thus have no clue whether it's actually good adaptation or not. Regardless, I thought this story had maybe not more depth to it as such, but it felt better rounded overall. There was just something more to the story that I could connect a lot more to. The story being that of a hat maker named Sophie who is rescued, kind of, one afternoon from 2 creepy guards by a wizard named Howl, only to then wind up cursed by a witch he spurned years prior to the story. This curse ages Sophie into an old lady and prevents her from revealing the identity of the one who cursed her. She resolves to find Howl in the wilds outside of her hometown and get help. And it's pretty whimsical fantasy, right? There's a walking house machine, that was really cool actually, a half-fire demon named Calcifer, who was cute but also had sass, a magical scarecrow named Turnip Head, a little boy wizard who is Hal's apprentice. But then there's also a broader conflict involving fantastical airships and militarized wizards that transform into winged creatures. Howl's Moving Castle basically felt like a fairy tale that isn't quite a fairy tale either. That kind of fantasy, which I'm assuming is largely due to the nature of the source material. I enjoyed the characters, the whimsy, the earnest emotion at the heart of it, and having now seen technically 3, Studio Ghibli movies, I can add this. I find what I assume is the general direction of the studio's art style just beautiful. The color work, the almost watercolor quality of the landscapes, the detail in the houses, the objects, the way the imagery comes together, the emotion conveyed by the character, their interactions, everything. It all felt very visually satisfying and just, yeah, effective. And so I'd give Howl's Moving Castle a 7 to a soft 7.5 out of 10. And yes, I will be watching other Studio Ghibli movies in the future. And that concludes my reading and, well, watching wrap-up for the month of August. In the month of September, I will be reading, wait for it, The Kingkiller Chronicles. Yup, I've already started, in fact, and I'm happy to report I'm enjoying The Name of the Wind so far. I hope you all had a good reading and everything else month of August. And on that very final note, I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, or whichever time of day you prefer. As always, do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for the continued support, and I shall see you all reasonably soon in the next video, but until then, bye-bye.